Afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on the GDPR. My name is Siddharth, or just Sid, if that's easier, and I'm from the IT Security Solutions team at Manage Engine, and I will be your presenter for today's session. I'm also joined by our product experts from our tech support and pre-sales team who are available on the live chat throughout the webinar. But before we get started, I just want to make sure that there are no issues with my audio, and I hope you have no issues in viewing my presentation. That is my shared screen. So in case you have any difficulties, reach out to us on the live chat option in the webinar console, and let us know if you have any issues. We'll try to fix them right away. So I'm just going to pause for about 30 seconds to a minute. We still have more people joining in, and in case you have any issues, reach out to us on the live chat and we'll try to fix them right away. Right, so I hope everything is all right with my audio as well as my shared screen. So once again, on behalf of everyone from the Manage Engine team, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar and taking time off from your busy schedules. So I hope it will be a useful session. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a 30-minute session today where we're going to discuss some key ideas about ensuring GDPR compliance. And at the end of that, for the next 20 or 25 minutes, like I said, we're available on the live chat. So reach out to us and ask your questions that you may have regarding your GDPR audits, and we'll interact with you on the live chat and answer your questions. Just want to get another housekeeping thing out of the way, which is that we'll be sending you the recording of today's session via email within a day or two. So don't worry about that. You'll get a copy of the video recording as well. Right. So the GDPR is here, and for several months, all of you must have been working on building a data security program that aligns with the different articles of the GDPR. And hopefully by now you have most things, if not everything, in place for the GDPR, because remember, it came into effect 10 days ago and it's here to stay. But here's the thing, your work doesn't stop right there, because you've done a lot of preparation and done a lot of revamping of existing security policies. But remember, your work doesn't stop there, because the GDPR, just like other new regulations, such as the new PCI DSS, all of these regulations are going to be implemented continuously. What I mean by that is that compliance must be shown all through the year and not just at the time of audit, right? So hopefully you have gotten things in place by now, such as your revamped consent documents and privacy policies and things like that. And what I want to focus on in today's webinar are certain things that you need to continue to stay on top of over these next many months and years for the GDPR, right? So this is what we have planned for today's session. This is the webinar agenda, and we're going to start off by looking at two very crucial aspects of the GDPR when it comes to security administrators. Right? We're going to focus on today's webinar specifically on requirements that security teams and security administrators might be concerned about. So we're going to start off by looking at two very important articles, 32 and 33, and then go over some key parts of the GDPR security program, right? In terms of starting off with personal data discovery, getting some documentation in place, implementing security auditing in your environment, and then also look at how we can set up mechanisms to detect potential threats and also prepare for the mandatory data breach notification part of the GDPR, right? So this is what we have planned for today's session. This is what we're going to cover. And like I said, keep interacting with us on the live chat. Drop in your questions at any point over the course of the session. Any other question that you might have, we've got experts right here to answer these questions. So make use of that over the course of the webinar. Right, so let's start off by looking at two important articles of the GDPR. Right, so firstly, article number 32, which is a really crucial aspect of the GDPR and should be a concern for any security professional. right? And the Article 32 really talks about security of processing, right? And I've got some text from the GDPR, and all of these are quoted verbatim, and I've just highlighted a few certain parts of the text to highlight what is expected from organizations, right? Because it says here, ensure the ongoing confidentiality, integrity, availability, and resilience of processing systems and services, right? So what this means is that once you've collected data over the course of processing and storage, you have to ensure that the data is confidential, that only the authorized people can access or modify it. You have to ensure integrity, which means that the correctness of the value of the data has to be maintained, availability and resilience, right? So what this means is it's sort of related to the second point, which says restore the availability and access to personal data in a timely manner in the event of a physical or technical incident, right? So if you have an incident in your organization, you should be in a position to restore the availability of personal data, right? You can't afford for data loss, right? So if you have a cyber attack or something of or anything of that kind, you should have taken a backup so that you can then restore the availability and all the accesses that were assigned to that personal data, right? So, and this is again coming to the third quote that you see on the screen, and that talks about preventing the destruction, loss, and alteration and unauthorized disclosure or access to personal data, right? So it's your responsibility to ensure that once you've collected personal data, you should ensure that you should prevent the destruction or the loss of the data. So this is one article, and we're going to be talking more about how we can implement these over the course of the webinar. But I wanted to start off by talking about this one because this really gives a good picture on the kinds of measures you'd want to have in place when it comes to the GDPR, right? So you look at things like backup solutions, right, for recovery. You look at monitoring solutions to ensure that you're able to track the integrity, file integrity monitoring, right? If some of you have come across this term, is a type of technology that ensures that every single modification and access to personal data stored in files and folders is actually being tracked continuously, right? So think about the kinds of technologies that you would need to ensure all of these things. And again, it's important to understand the jargon that the GDPR uses in terms of words like ongoing confidentiality, right? Because this is, again, not something that you forget about once you collect personal data. This is something that has to be continuous and real time, right? So think about this. Keep this in mind. Keep this at the back of your head. And try to relate back to article number 32 as we look at other things in the webinar. And then I have article number 33, which talks about the notification of personal data breach, right? And this is against that an article that has got a lot of people talking because this is very explicit in what it demands, right? Because there's a lot of text in the GDPR that people are still saying, oh, I don't know, it's still a little bit gray area for me and it's not too definitive in what it's asking for. But here we've got another article, just like 32, where we have in Article 33 a very specific requirement that the GDPR is demanding, right? Which basically says that in case you have a personal data breach, you have to report the breach not later than 72 hours, right? Which is about 3 days. And it also expects you to document any personal data breaches along with all the facts relating to the personal data breach, right? So this is a classic example of a mandatory data breach notification, which is also incorporated in this legislation, right? So this is again something that we're going to be looking more into over the course of the webinar, but I want you to think about the kinds of measures and technologies that you would want to have in place to tackle these two articles. Article number 32, which has a lot of language pertaining to the confidentiality and integrity of data and things like that. And you have article number 33, which demands you to report personal data breaches within 72 hours. Right, so we have some of you already talking with us on the live chat, and one of our users, John, is actually saying that he uses monitoring technology to stay on top of some of these things, and that is very valid, right? Because you want to be in a position where you're able to monitor events from your locations where you're storing personal data, like your database servers and file servers and things like that. So I also want to use this as an opportunity to tell you to keep interacting with us on the live chat and tell us what kinds of technologies you're looking at when it comes to articles number 32 and 33, and also if you've got things in place already, or whether you feel that there is something missing to be able to do the things demanded by these two articles, right? So let's move on and look at exactly how we can go about achieving what is being asked for, right? So this is again something that ideally you should have already done, and if you've already done, again, you don't want to stop there, but you want to ensure that this is an ongoing process, right? So we're going to start everything when it comes to data security with what is known as data discovery, right? The whole process starts with data discovery, which is really identifying the kind of personal data your organization deals with and where it is being stored. Because, for example, you might be from finance, so you might be dealing with credit card details and financial details of your customers. You might be from healthcare, in which case you might be dealing with personal healthcare information of patients, right? So you need to first identify what kind of personal data that you deal with, and also then where is it currently being stored, right? So here for data discovery, you might want to look at technologies that allow you to actually automatically discover where personal data is being stored in your environment, right? Personal data, or to be more in tune with GDPR lingo, I'd say PII, or personally identifiable information, right? So there is technology out there which can actually help you to scan your network and actually define file discovery policies so that you can then identify where personal data that concerns you is actually being stored in your network, right? So this is the first step, really, to discover personal data in your environment. And then comes data isolation, right? So isolating the personal data from the rest of the data stored in your network is ideal to the extent possible, of course, but this is going to be really, really important, because isolating personal data will make it easier for you to not only manage the personal data better, but more importantly, it allows you to manage accesses to personal data, right? Because if you're able to, once you discover where personal data resides in your network, if you're actually able to isolate this to a certain location, then it becomes so much easier for you to define security policies, define permissions and accesses and things like that to a single concentrated area, right? Because remember, you have a lot of confidential data in your environment, and that's the challenge. But again, amongst confidential data, you're going to have some data which is specifically considered PII by the GDPR, and that is exactly what you want to focus on, right? So it can get a little tricky trying to segregate this GDPR PII from the rest of the confidential data that you have in your network. But it makes sense investing time and resources and money if needed to actually discover where your personal data is being stored. That is, your personally identifiable information is being stored, and then isolate this from the rest of your network so that you can then easily define security policies and permissions and settings over that isolated location, right? So this is very important, and this is something that people overlook at a starting stage, which makes all of the things that you have to do later a whole lot harder. So make sure you're getting this part right. And once you've got this in place, then you need to look at getting some basic data loss prevention measures in place, right? At least basic measures, if not an advanced DLP solution. So this is going to be, again, obviously important to detect and prevent data exfiltration at different points in your data processing, right? So you have essentially three stages, and you might be familiar with this, which is when data is in use or in motion or at rest. So at these different points, when data is in use or in motion or at rest, you want to ensure that you have some mechanisms in place to prevent the loss of data. Because again, tying back to article number 32, this is something that the GDPR expects you to do. So DLP, that's one thing to focus on. And then you have backup. And this is like an age-old thing in IT, and despite all of us knowing its importance, people don't do it, right? And there is really no excuse for not backing up your data, because even if you for a moment forget about the GDPR, and if you look at other scenarios that we face in security today, attacks like ransomware and things like that, backup really is the only way you can recover from any problem, any attack or any problem. And not only that, coming back to the GDPR, you also, if we go back to article number 32, you can actually see that the second point that you see on the screen, it says explicitly that you need to be able to restore the availability and access to personal data in a timely manner in the event of a physical or technical incident, right? So what this means is that you need to have your data on your file servers and things like that backed up, so that in case something goes wrong, you are able to restore that piece of data. And again, it says restore the accesses as well, which means, again, you want to be looking at backing up your Active Directory objects and things like that as well. Right? So this is a very crucial aspect of the GDPR, because this is explicitly stated, and this is a fundamental concern for any security administrator. Right? So just moving forward, back to the slide deck, what I've tried to capture in this slide really is a process of achieving that sort of identification of personal data in your environment, and then adding different layers of security measures in and around your personally identifiable information, right? And even though this flow diagram seems like a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, it's also sort of like a circular diagram, right? Even though that's not how I've represented it. And I say that because this has to be a continuous process, right? Because you're going to keep collecting new data. It's not like you've done this before May 25th and now everything is in place and you're good to go. You're going to obviously keep collecting more and more personal data over the next months and years. So you have to keep constantly running these kinds of data discovery scans and building what people call a data dictionary, right? Which is essentially like your personal data inventory, right? So you want to be able to do this continuously, so that as and when you keep collecting more personal data and storing it in your network, you are in a position to know exactly where it is stored and keep defining your security policies, and adding those layers of security on top of all the data that you're collecting. Right. So this is an important slide that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that you want to keep working on, even though the GDPR, even if you've already finished your first round of GDPR implementation. So this brings me to documentation, right? And documentation, obviously important for any audit. And if you've gone through the GDPR, you may have actually come across this term, right? Technical and organizational measures. So, and this is actually elaborated in Article 24, and I'm not going to get into those details too much, but that is another important aspect of the GDPR, which really talks about the responsibility of the data controller and the different requirements that they must meet, right? And what they say is that you want to implement technical and organizational measures, which are essentially measures to ensure that you are protecting the data during all the stages of data processing. right? So throughout the data processing, it is your responsibility to ensure that you have implemented technical and organizational measures to ensure that during data collection or processing or storage, you have security measures at each point. And the reason why the GDPR demands this is to ensure accountability in the collection, processing, and storage of personal data, right? So accountability is the key. So you must ensure that everything is proper and secure in the processing of data. So this means that that you must really take all the appropriate measures to ensure that the data is secure at every stage. All of these data processing activities must be reviewed, right? So whatever you had in place and whatever you've changed or revamped, all of these things must be reviewed and validated and documented. You must not only have a clear process in place, but also document these measures pertaining to the things we said, the collection and the processing and storage of personal data. Because at the end of the day, this is what your auditors are going to want to know, right? They're going to ask you what kinds of measures do you have in place at these different stages, and they want to know if you have tested and validated them, and whether you have reviewed them, and whether you're tracking them, right? So this is where documentation comes into the picture. And maintaining documentation is really something you want to do from the beginning, and not run around for these details at the time of your audit, right? So here it makes good sense to have enough resources in place in terms of manpower to really ensure that documentation of all the measures in place for data processing, all the security measures in place for data processing are being tracked continuously and are being documented, right? The exact processes that you have, as well as the security measures that you have on top of them, all of these things must be validated and documented from the start and continuously tracked. This is documentation, which is the second thing that I wanted to discuss in the webinar. So talk to us on the live chat. Tell us what you guys are doing for the stuff that we've discussed so far, because that is one of the whole points in having this webinar, right? Because we've spoken so much in detail about the GDPR over the last few months. We've had so many meetups and events and webinars, and the whole point of today's webinar was to talk to you guys on the live chat, to engage with you about different areas of concern for the GDPR, right? So far we've looked at getting data discovery and isolation and data loss prevention measures and backup in place. We've discussed getting our documentation ready for audits. So let us know what you guys think and what you guys are doing, so that we can also help understand your situations better, and also help you with either with our solutions, or just with our expertise in any way that we can. Right. So moving on to the third thing that I wanted to talk about today, which is on security auditing. Right. We've talked about certain measures that you want to have in place, and one crucial aspect when it comes to continuously tracking security events is obviously enabling your auditing policies on your systems, right? So you obviously want to be in a position where you can run reports and schedule reports and track different kinds of events happening from a security point of view in your network. And this really is going to be, again, crucial for the GDPR when we talk about Article 32, right? Because we looked at ensuring integrity and confidentiality of the data. So you want to really be able to run reports for things like files being accessed, and which are the files being accessed and which are the files being modified, and things like that. So I'm just going to come back to this slide. I'm just jumping to the next slide where I have a screenshot of a report from one of our own solutions. This is actually Manage Engine Log 360, which is a comprehensive SIM solution that can give you this kind of reporting and alerting functionality that is important for the GDPR. So what I have on the screen is actually an overview report of the different file changes happening on a particular file server, right? And you can see different things are being tracked. You have files and folders that have been deleted, renamed, moved, modified, created, and things like that. And you have a lot of granular details available, right? So you want to be able to track these things in your environment. You have things like changes being made on servers based on users, files, folder permission changes, your SACL changes, right? And you're able to you want to be in a position where you can run these reports and get important data about the different security events happening in your network, right? Because once you've implemented basic measures in place and validated permissions and things like that, once you've done that, you then want to be able to keep reviewing the different things that are happening on a weekly or monthly basis, right? So you want to be able to review who's accessing your files, who's changing the personal data stored on your files and things like that, whether the access is being made or authorized, or whether an unauthorized person is trying to access the file and is having too many failed attempts and things like that, right? So with regards to that, you also want to be looking at tracking different changes happening in your environment, like, because first you would have assign different user permissions and security groups and things like that. And over the course of time, these things might be subject to changes, right? So user permissions might be changed. So if someone who's not supposed to access a particular file that has sensitive data is given access, that is something that you want to be tracking, right? So here's where I said, like I showed you a screenshot. We're not going to make this a product intensive webinar, but what I wanted to talk about is how you can leverage technology like SIM solutions to really achieve this kind of continuous auditing and tracking and generating reports and things like that, right? So this is an important aspect when it comes to the GDPR, because again, this is an extension of basic documentation, right? Because here you're able to go deeper and understand what's happening in your network once you applied your different security policies, right? You want to be in a position to really track the different kinds of activities happening on your personal data, right? In terms of accesses and modifications and things like that. So this is the third thing that I wanted to talk about, which is really being able to generate reports like the one that you see on the screen, right? Being able to understand what's happening to your files and folders and databases, who's really able to access and modify data, because this is again could lead to a GDPR violation, because it explicitly says that you want to ensure integrity of data. So you need to really track if any changes are happening to the data, and if yes, who's making the changes and things like that. So this brings me to the fourth thing that I wanted to discuss, which is again building on the previous slide that talked about security auditing. And this is to actually detect potential threats with alerts, right? So in the previous slide, we looked more at reviewing activity, running reports for the files that are being accessed, running reports for the people who are logging onto the file servers, for the different modifications being made, for the files being created or deleted or things like that. But here we're looking at detecting threats by getting alerts, right? Because if you look at if I give you a scenario where you want to track all the people who have logged on to a file server that contains personal data, you probably can just run a report on a weekly basis and check whether everything is fine. But in case someone who is unauthorized tries to access the file server and keeps failing to access it, that could be related to breach activity, and you want to be able to get alerts for events like that, right? And I've highlighted a few events in red. You have events like logon failures and account lockouts, accesses to the files that contain personal data, modifications made to data, user behavior anomalies, and things like that. So you want to be able to track these things and receive alerts when misuse happens. And again, you have more advanced attacks like ransomware and SQL injection, installations of malware, denial of service, and all of these things out there, which can actually affect your personal data that you're storing in your files and folders and databases, right? So you again here need security technology like event correlation, right? Incident detection and response, which is getting these alerts for indicators of compromise and being able to respond either automatically or semi-automatically to these threats, right? So you want to be able to mitigate potential breaches at an early stage. And again, here's where you want to have advanced technology in place. Again, SIM solutions, security information and event management solutions, which can do this functionality for you, right? In terms of being able to track events continuously, in terms of giving you reports to periodically review events, in terms of giving you alerts for potential threats, in terms of being able to help you respond quickly and efficiently to evolving threats in your network, right? So you want to have these protection mechanisms in place, uh, again, really to be able to meet the requirements of Article 32 and 33. And Article 33 specifically says breach reporting, right? So getting these alerts at an early stage and curbing breaches ensures that you don't even have to go to the stage of having to be breached and having to report the breach, right? So this is the fourth thing that I wanted to discuss, which is on setting up alerts in your environment so that you can detect potential threats and respond to these breaches and curb these breaches at an early stage. Which brings me to the fifth and final point, which is what do you do if you actually get breached, right? Because um, we looked a lot at implementing security policies and implementing measures at different stages to try to keep our data secure to the extent possible. But what if, despite your best measures, you get breached? What do you do then? So what the GDPR actually says when it comes to a data breach, it says that a data breach is a breach of security leading to destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure, or access to personal data, right? So it's important to first understand exactly what constitutes a data breach as per the GDPR, because sometimes there is a misconception in defining these terms. And I'll be honest with you, when people say data breach, I immediately picture a cyber criminal infiltrating my network and accessing and copying data from a sensitive file server, right? But the thing is, a lot of other things, less obvious things, can also be deemed as a data breach as per the GDPR, right? So you have destruction of personal data, which is where the data no longer exists or no longer exists in a form that is of any use to the data controller. You have damage, what they deem as damage to personal data, which is where personal data has been altered or corrupted or is no longer the same as when you collected it, right? So again, think Article 32, where they say you want to ensure uh, you don't have the unlawful loss or destruction of data. And loss of data is of course a little more straightforward. The data may exist, but the controller doesn't have control over it really, and access or doesn't have control or access to it anymore, and it's fallen in the wrong hands. And then you have unauthorized disclosure or access to personal data, which is more which has more to do with the disclosure of data to recipients who are not authorized to receive access to the data, right? This is when uh, you've assigned permissions to the right set of users, but someone else is granted permission to view or modify the personal data that is concerned with, right? So all of these things are still deemed as a data breach. So a data breach is not limited to some external malicious actor breaching your network. A lot of other things that I just said, all of these things still constitute a data breach. And if any of these things happen, you have to report the breach to the authorities within 72 hours or risk the fine for non-compliance, right? So this is the challenge. So you want to have measures in place to the extent possible where you can eliminate breaches before they even happen. But sometimes, despite best measures, if a breach happens, you still need to ensure that you're in a position to respond and report the breach. Right. So here again, I've been talking a lot about SIM technology, and if it probably wouldn't surprise you then that we have a SIM solution at Manage Engine called Log 360. You probably noticed the logo at the bottom of the screen, and what a tool like Log 360 can do for you in a situation like this is help you search through the logs from your different systems and really help you backtrack the attack and obtain important information pertaining to the breach, right? Because in your breach report, you have to include certain details, right? Details such as the um, assessment of the breach, the people who are affected, the consequences of the data breach, the different measures that you adopted to prevent the breach and in response to the breach, and also, of course, the contact details of the DPO, which is the data protection officer, right? So in submitting the breach report to the authorities, you need to ensure that you have clear-cut details about the breach in terms of exactly what happened, which IP address uh, came into your network, and what changes did they make to your network to access data and things like that. So here again, SIM technology can help you track all of these things and ideally try to help you detect these things at an early stage and help you prevent the breach from happening. Or worst case, if the breach still happens, you're still in a position to backtrack the events and furnish the incident report that your auditors need, right? And this is very, very important because all of these things that we discussed in terms of adhering to Articles 32 and 33, all of these are so important because if you don't have these measures in place and if you get breached, you are liable to the fine that you see on the screen, the fine that you see in red, 10 million euros or 2% of the company's total worldwide annual turnover, right? So this is potentially for so many businesses, this could end up leading to the business shutting down. And this is why it is so important to invest time and resources in implementing these security measures on your personal data and also documenting everything at every stage so that you ensure compliance during your GDPR audits, right? So this is really what I wanted to touch upon in today's webinar and talk about important ideas surrounding personal data discovery and isolation, getting data loss prevention measures in place, backing up your data, getting your documentation in place in terms of your data processing, collection, processing, and storage, getting your documentation in place in terms of security measures that you have on your personal data. I wanted to discuss the security auditing aspect of running reports and periodically reviewing activity on your personal data to ensure integrity. We looked at setting up alerts to detect threats to your personal data security so that you can mitigate breaches at an early stage. And we also looked at what you need to do in case you have a breach, right? So these are all areas that I just wanted to touch upon, mainly to encourage a discussion about all of these things on the live chat. So some of you have already been interacting with us over the course of the webinar. So thank you so much for doing that. And for the rest of you, please reach out to us on the live chat. We have this is only the presentation part of the webinar is concluded. So keep reaching out to us on the live chat and engaging with us so that we can help you solve your GDPR related concerns. So apart from that, that's all from me for today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us and interacting with us on the live chat. Do take a moment at the end of the webinar to fill up your feedback and let us know if your questions were answered and what other topics you'd like to see in future webinars. Right. So once again, thank you so much for joining us and have a great day. I'm also going to share a link on the live chat, which will help you, which is basically I'm pointing you to some resources that will help you understand and implement technology for the GDPR, right? So this is just a small free resource that we created at Manage Engine. You just have to leave your business email ID and you can get access to a free GDPR resource kit, right? So it has ebooks about the GDPR and about implementing security measures for the GDPR. It also has details about Manage Engine solutions for the GDPR as well, right? So check this out if you need more details about implementing security measures for the GDPR.